Studios. This EA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
All right, 25 minutes before 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I think probably most people know somebody who's autistic. We have several people we know. Some we know very close. We're very close to a few autistic people, not just children. Some of them were children when we met them. Now they're adults, right? It's an amazing thing to see how some of them have developed. And in some cases, I don't even know that I think sometimes it's because you know somebody better. You know, you don't necessarily notice things like that. Like Doug, he's in the other room. He's going to be 59 this month, by the way.
Yeah,
he's got Down syndrome, and he's kind of hanging out with us to get out of harm's way of the storm, and so it's fun to have him around. But you know, yesterday, and I know Down syndrome and autism are two completely different things, but just if I could just say this, that yesterday it was funny because he's kind of hanging out with us because the group home he lives in, it's, you know, they had to evacuate, so
yeah.
He was telling us how he used to fool his mother by changing channels on the TV, and she would say, "Are you trying to trick me?" And I said to him, and I meant it. I said, "You know, you were a real blessing." His mother's gone, but
yeah.
I said, "You were a blessing to your mother." And I was thinking about some of those stories you hear about people who have been told before giving birth, that their child will be Down syndrome.
Down syndrome, yeah.
And I don't know. It's just, to me, I don't know. We're all blessings to one another. So that's just me. Dr. Dan L. Edmunds is on the phone. He wrote a book called Being Autistic, An Approach Towards Understanding and Acceptance. He's got a lot of initials after his name, Robin. He's an addictions professional, a psychotherapist. He completed undergraduate studies at the University of Florida. Is he in the area?
In Tampa.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He's an internationally certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor. He earned a doctorate of education in pastoral community counseling. He has dedicated his life to making other people's lives better. That's how I would sum it up. Mm-hmm. Right?
Exactly.
Dr. Edmunds, what an honor to have you on our show. Good morning, sir.
Yes, good morning. Thank you.
And how are you? Are you in Tampa right now?
I am not in Tampa. I'm in Northeast Pennsylvania.
Oh, my gosh.
Okay.
Well, you really got out of town, didn't you?
Well, that's actually where I've been for some time. I'm originally from the Tampa area.
Ah, okay. Well, thank you for being on the show with us today. So, does your work with autistic people go way back? Has this been a main part of your career?
This has been part of my work since about 2003, and it also there is a personal reason as to why that is. So I'll give a little background. So if you had, you have a 4-year-old child who can read at a very advanced level. When he gets frustrated, sometimes flaps his hands, so forth, and later requires about 2 years of speech therapy, 2 years of occupational therapy because of motor skills deficits, tested in the gifted range, 2nd grade. By middle school, is told by a teacher that he's one of the most talented but unusual students that she has, develops kind of a fascination for world religions, belief systems, and can spout off about that for hours. Wow. And probably most people around him might get bored with those things, but later goes on to study comparative religion and then gets into the counseling field. So that was my story.
Is that you?
And that was my story. And it was much later until I realized that I was in the autism spectrum, and I began working with autistic children, and the mentor that I had, who was kind of training me in relational approaches, certainly made that suggestion to me very early on. And I think it kind of shaped the approach that I have in regards to working with these individuals.
Okay, I'm a little confused. So you are diagnosed autistic?
Yes.
Okay. Can I ask you a question? I hope this isn't personal, and I hope it doesn't seem like I'm buying into a stereotype of sorts. But But based on what you said, are you also considered savant?
I guess arguably that could be said.
Okay. I mean, it sounds whatever savant means. That's somebody who can do amazing things mentally, but maybe can't tie their shoes. That kind of thing is usually what you hear, right?
Right. Well, what I began to realize, definitely in some aspects, for instance, it was always interesting to me that I can get up in front of large groups of people and give a lecture and so forth. But if I had to come down from the stage and there's a large group of people and have to actually interact and shake hands and so forth, that's always been something that's been a little bit taxing for me. So I see that within the autism spectrum, there are definitely amazing strengths that people have, but there's also the challenges too. And I think the focus on how we interact should be to not try to alter the person, but to try to support them and to help them bring out the things that they do have that are positive. Mm-hmm. I'll mention the story in that regard. I had a young man that I began working with when he was about 13, and he had kind of this fascination with lottery tickets, and you would go into his room and the whole room was covered like wallpaper with lottery tickets. And he was very brilliant at making videos. And he struggled, went through a lot of bullying when he was in high school. A lot of people didn't really understand him, and he later wanted to go on to college. And his family was like, "No, I don't think that he's going to be able to do that and be able to handle that." So through our time together and with a lot of encouragement, he found his niche when he went into college, and he actually ran a radio program at the college. He continued to do the videos, and that's what he ended up getting his degree in. And the fascinating thing with the videos, when he was younger, his family kind of looked at it as just some strange obsession that he had. But as I began to examine him very closely, they actually were telling about his life and his experiences, both positive and negative, at the time. So that's how I look at it. It was just trying to help him find his niche. Mm-hmm. And to be able to overcome some of the challenges that were there.
Go ahead,
and you have to, the people that are not autistic, but they're in school with the children or adults who are autistic or on the job, they have to understand also that they have to change their way and really pay attention and learn more how to communicate.
And that's been a major focus that I've had too, which I think is lacking, is that there's definitely a need for peer education, so that the peers in school settings and work settings, that they can understand the person a little bit better. Now, we have various times where let's support autistic awareness and so forth. And this is what I've kind of seen, that in the beginning, I think some people have this idea of trying to eradicate autism, and I think that's based on ignorance. And I don't blame these individuals, because I think sometimes that's all they know. And then they begin to merge to more acceptance. But then they kind of feel like pity for the person. And I would say that's tolerance. But we can move even beyond that to being able to understand diversity and communication and forms of expression. So that's kind of the furtherance of acceptance. But the key principles that I use is, I think we have to have respect, dignity. I always presume intellect. So just because a person may not communicate verbally does not necessarily mean that they are lacking in intellect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's sometimes a false assumption that's made. And I always encourage self-advocacy and empowerment. So I think that's where our focus should be. That rather than focusing on this idea of, well, let's be aware of autism, let's empower autistic people.
Do you know, you mentioned your ability to speak eloquently from a stage, but you get with a group of people and the shyness kicks in, or whatever you want to call it. I think that right there is one example. For example, if somebody is able to write really well, but they don't speak the same way they write, so it's almost like you're looking at two different people when you read what they wrote and you listen to them talk. I think a lot of those things we have, the rest of us have to understand that all of us are talented in one way or another. And I don't think God leaves anybody out. You're talented in your way, and Robin is talented in hers, and that's what makes the world go round, I suppose. I wanted to ask you about the word spectrum, because I know obviously it means that whoever is autistic is not necessarily like somebody else who's autistic. There's clearly a big difference between people who are diagnosed autistic. Is there a medical explanation for that?
Well, what I'll mention is that there was the Asperger's syndrome. It was initially listed as a diagnosis, and then you also had pervasive developmental disorder, which basically kind of encompassed just anyone who might have had some type of developmental quirk. With the DSM-5, the psychiatric manual, that was revised to kind of lump everything into the category of autism spectrum disorder. So now there are 3 levels based on what they would identify as the severity there. But even in the situations where you see, okay, a person is in the level 3, so they're considered most severe, does not mean that they cannot be reached and supported. So I can give an example there that I had a young man. Now, he had paralysis on the left side of his body, and he had various medical concerns, but he was also diagnosed autistic, and he was blind. So with all of that, there were people who kind of just wrote him off that, no, he doesn't speak, he can't see, he can hardly walk and get around, so there's nothing you could possibly do to reach him. And what I recall with him that was quite amazing is that he knew his surroundings just by touch, and he loved music, and that's what I found is the thing to connect with him on. So he would grab me by the hand, and even though he could not see, he would feel his way around, and he would guide me to where the stereo was, and I would turn it on, and he would dance. And so that was the connection. That was the medium to be able to reach him, and I thought that was a very important connection. Well, whereas others were kind of looking at, you can't really do much of anything with him.
I love what you've just said. I can apply that to anybody trying to work with anybody. But I have two things that come to mind when you told us that story. Is one, good for you for knowing to find something that will connect you to another person, looking for that one thing. I mean, quite often when you're talking to children, you'll get a blank stare or they won't care, and then you'll say, do you like horses? And yeah. And all of a sudden you've zoomed in on something that they like and they can pay attention to you. But I have a question for you regarding that. Once you established that, once you understood that music was the bridge, what do you do at that point? Do you help him with his other struggles in life?
Absolutely. That was one of the means that we use, and sometimes we could spend a lot of time just doing that. But once I made that connection with him and he was comfortable with me, then we could try to work on some other skills in the process of that. But the key thing was making that connection initially. I can mention another little story kind of along those lines that I had one little guy that came in, and he had not used any verbal skills at all, and he was about 5 years old, and he came in and he was being kind of mischievous, so he would go into where the secretary was, and he kept banging on her computer keyboard. So we had a ball pit in the middle of the room, and I knew that he enjoyed that. So I told him, I said, if you keep banging on that keyboard, I'm going to scoop you up and I'm going to throw you in the ball pit.
Oh.
So he perfectly understood what I said to him. So I did that, and he giggles and laughs. The next time he comes around and he puts his hand towards the keyboard and doesn't actually touch it, but just kind of looks at it and smirks, and then falls back into my arms. So then I throw him in again, and then he giggles and laughs, and then he actually used words and told me to do it again. And his family was like amazed that they said he's never said anything before. So it's just those kind of connections. And from that point, just by that, his verbal skills began to improve dramatically over time as we continued our work together.
And that's the sense of empowerment then that you instilled in him to be somewhat independent.
Right. And I also I tried to now this is kind of the problem that I have seen in some programs that are more based on a behavioralist approach that is kind of stimulus response. That, okay, well, we have this skill we're going to teach you, and if you do this, then you get an M&M. And I find some of that very degrading and almost kind of along the lines of how you would train an animal.
Oh, sure.
Right.
So for me, the key thing is the relationship that is built and creating a safe space between me and the individual where they feel comfortable and they can grow and they feel respected.
Do you know what I see, Dan? I see that the profound understanding of religion that you had as a young person is manifesting itself now in something very similar, because if you think about it, I mean, except for maybe some exceptions, religions mostly are trying to teach us that there's a God and he loves us. That's pretty much the bottom line of almost all religions. I mean, there's lots of little caveats to them, but that's the bottom line. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're showing this young man you just told us about that there is at least one person in this world who loves him enough to want to do fun things with him, and that gets him to come out of his shell in the same way that you've discovered what things bring you out of your own shell.
Right. And I think that my interest in comparative religion, so I think kind of shapes some of the values and approach that I have. I'll mention that is kind of just a strange little quirk that I have, is that there are times where I have actually related better to individuals outside my own culture than some within. And I can mention one kind of amusing story that happened, and I got a kick out of this. Having studied many of these things, I remember going into a convenience store, and there was a man there that was from India, and he was listening to a prayer on his cell phone, and I just happened to know what it was. So I began to sing along to what it was. And he looks at me very strangely, and he says, "How do you know that?" And me being a little bit silly in it and just wanting to kind of see his reaction, I said, "Well, doesn't everyone know that?" and then I just kind of walked away. And and later I explained it when I saw him again. I explained how I knew these things, but I think I definitely kind of boggled his mind as to how someone not from his culture would have possibly have known that.
How do you encourage parents and family members to let go and allow the person with autism to become their own person and not have those guilt feelings that they can't keep protecting them all the time?
Well, when I work with parents, I try to focus them in on those ideas of empowerment and for them to realize that I think one of the aspects that gets instilled in people's minds is that somehow that autism is a disease and that these persons are defective, or sometimes the parents get the false idea that somehow they bear some responsibility for it in some way, or there's also been other theories which are disproven and false, that autism comes from vaccines, and you find all of these various strange alternative remedies that are supposed to kind of like suck the autism out of the person. But once they can realize and accept, okay, this is just a part of who they are. This is a mode of being. And to get them focused in not on all of the weaknesses that one may have, but get them focused in on the strengths that they have, positive strengths, and to help them find their niche and to come to some acceptance that. Okay, yes, there are challenges. So I think that was something in the past that, as I focused in on this idea of empowerment and strength, that some people thought that somehow I was glamorizing autism. That I was saying that, well, no, they don't have any struggles and just focus on the positive and all of that. And that's not what I'm saying at all. That I definitely understand that there are many individuals that have many challenges, that being in the autism spectrum is not always an easy thing. There's sensory difficulties, there's socialization difficulties, there's many challenges.
Right.
But at the same time, to recognize that we're still human beings.
Right. Oh, you're so smart.
And that we still deserve respect, dignity, and the ability to have some say in our own lives.
Yeah. I think you hit on it. I mean, respect and love and friendship, and those almost sounds corny, but they're so true and so powerful. And they're true no matter how old you are, and they're true no matter how smart you are, and they're true no matter what kind of disabilities you might have. And easily, if you had some kind of a communication disability, then also being deaf or blind might contribute or exasperate that. Is that the word, exasperate, I'm looking for? Mm-hmm. And I applaud you and think you're right on target in acknowledging and noticing those things. Is the book, Being Autistic is what the book is called for those just tuning in. Is the book to teach us all what you've just expressed in a better way, in a bigger way? Yes.
There's some criticisms that I make of some of the current programs that are out there. I offer some idea of what a relational approach entails, and then there's just some nice stories of how this has actually been put into effect.
Can I ask you to talk about bullying a little bit? I know that doesn't sound like it's an autistic question, but I'm wondering if maybe the same thing that causes the bullied kid, not the bully himself, but the bullied kid, or maybe the bully himself, but the bullied kid sometimes becomes introverted and sometimes develops quirky behaviors. And again, it sounds like a lack of love or a lack of friendship or a lack of respect that's a big part of the problem.
Well, I see two sides to that I think we have to have an understanding of the bully themselves, that most of the young people I encountered that engage in that type of behavior were not feeling too good about themselves, and usually had some experience in their life where they're trying to kind of gain power over another. So that's one aspect. Or the idea too, and this happens with adults as well, that we don't want to understand what is different. So we just kind of reject it and we poke fun at it and so forth. So goes back to what I was saying too of the peer education, that once people get a better understanding of each other and they recognize the differences and they can accept those differences, then we have less of that being a problem.
Oh my gosh, I guess we went a little bit over. Doctor, it's been such an honor to have you on the show with us. The book is called Being Autistic, An Approach Towards Understanding and Acceptance. I found it on Amazon. Do you have a website you'd like to direct us to, or a Facebook page?
I have a site. If you type in my name and type self-growth, it'll come up, and it has a number of resources and background and so forth.
All right. Dr. Dan Edmunds, thank you so much. I found this conversation really inspiring, and you are such a profound man. Thank you for sharing your information with us today. Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, thank you very much.
Good stuff. We'll take a break. Be right back.
Broadcasting from the Paddock Mall Studios, this is WOCA, Ocala, Gainesville, The Villages, 1370 AM, 96.3 FM, The Source.
This is a special hurricane preparedness alert. Florida weather officials warn that Hurricane Dorian, the Category 5 monster that continues to batter parts of the Bahamas,